day, another dollar. Hey, it's Jane Muskie, who works with all these wonderful designers on equity through design mentorship. This is our 5th guest panel meeting, and this one is called Living Light. And we have some wonderful projection designers with us today. Who we have people from LA, Chicago, New York area. So it's going to be pretty great. We do record our sessions. Remember, we do not see your faces in the recording. We only see our panelists. And Elizabeth Popiel is doing a Q&A again, so you can send her messages. Do not overload the message slot with your own sort of back and forths and things. Just, just ask pure questions as we go and don't save them all for the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Robinson, who's the host for today, and she'll introduce the panel, and she's first going to start with our land acknowledgement. Thanks, everyone. See you at the end.
Thanks, Jane, so much. Again, welcome everybody. As Jane said, I'm going to start us off with our land acknowledgement. I'm going to go ahead and also pull that up so we can see it as well. Give me just one second. Oh. All right. Not sure how to. All right. So we wish to pay respects to the many Indigenous peoples of New York whose ancestors have been here since the time out of mind. We pay respect to their ancestors, past and present. I'm so sorry, I'm going to pause, but I'm not sure whoever is writing, if they could stop, that would be great. Apologies. Haven't had that happen before. Do that again.
Hey, Intune, STU, iPad, DMP, CT, 2Q, whatever. Please stop writing.
So I'm going to start that again. We wish to pay respect to the many Indigenous peoples of New York whose ancestors have been here since time out of mind. We pay respect to their ancestors, past, present, and future, starting with the Lenape people, including but not limited to the Merrick, Canarsie, Rockaway, Matinacock, Munsee Lenape, and Six Nations, and acknowledge that this city and nation were founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, cultures, and stories. In addition, the foundation of this city and many of its original buildings were built and funded by the sale of enslaved people of African descent. Thank you so much. So again, I'm so excited to have everyone here. Just again, a quick reminder to keep your cameras off and yourselves muted so that the panelists can be fully in view during the conversation. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. Again, Elizabeth Popiel will raise those at the end. We'll have time for a live Q&A and a chance for you to also interact with the participants. And without further ado, I would love to introduce you to our guests. All right. First, we have Wendall K. Harrington. Wendall's award-winning career has embraced diverse disciplines, including design for performance, publishing, and television. In live performance, Ms. Harrington has designed for Broadway, off-Broadway, concerts, opera, ballet, and more. Most recently, Ms. Harrington was the recipient of the Lifetime Recognition Award from the Knights of Illumination. As design director of Esquire magazine, Ms. Harrington was responsible for the redesign and relaunch of Men's Magazine of the 90s. Later, as editor-at-large for Esquire, she conceived and edited Randy Shields' My Life in AIDS tour. Ms. Harrington
will spend more than $50.
Ms. Harrington has been lecturing on projection design for theater since the early 90s and is the head of the projection design concentration at the Yale School of Drama. Next, we have Rasean Davonte Johnson. Davonte is video artist and designer of projections for theater, film, and installations. For his work as a theatrical designer, he has been awarded the Michael Maggio Emerging Designer Award in 2018 and the Joseph Jefferson Award for Best Projection Design in 2019. Additionally, he was part of the 2017 Opera America Robert L.B. Tobin Director Designer Showcase in Houston. His theater work includes collaborations with numerous institutions, including Steppenwolf Theater Company, Manual Cinema, Chicago Opera Theater, Yale Repertory Theater, Long Wharf Theater, McCarter Theater Center, the Studio Theater, Woolly Mammoth Theater, Alliance Theater, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and internationally with the Ningbo Song and Dance Company in China, B-Floor Theater in Thailand, and the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Scotland. He received his MFA from the Yale School of Drama in Design as a student in the projection program and has lectured at Yale University, Columbia College Chicago, Syracuse University, Boston University, the Theater School at DePaul, and Ohio State University. Next, we have Hana S. Kim. Hana is a projection and scenic designer with experience across film, theater, and public art. Her work has been seen in theaters across the country, including at the Public Theater in New York City, ACT in San Francisco Symphony, LA Opera, Geffen Playhouse, Pasadena Playhouse, Baltimore Center Stage, Opera Colorado, and South Coast Rep. Her art installations have been shown at the Annenberg Space of Photography in LA, the Jordan Downs Recreation Center, Occidental College, and Bershnikov Art Center in New York. Hana is a recipient of the Princess Grace Award in Theater Design, the Richard Sherwood Award from CTG, and Kinetic Lighting Award for Distinguished Achievement in Theatrical Design from LA Drama Critics Circle. Her designs have been recognized by the Helen Hayes Award, Stage Raw Awards, Stage Scene LA Awards, and Bay Area Theater Critics Circle Awards. She is a member of United Scenic Artists Local 829. Yee Eun Nam is a visual artist and an award-winning set and video designer for opera, theater, and any forms of live performances, currently based in LA. She was born and raised in Seoul, Korea, where she studied sculpture and metalcraft. She has been creating digital contents and video arts with the San Francisco Symphony, Boston Lyric Opera, Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, Goodman Theater, the Movement Company, and Rattlesticks Playwright Theater. She is currently working as one of the production designers of Close Quarters with Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. Yee Eun Nam has multiple nominations for the LA Stage Alliance Ovation Award and is a winner of the LADCC Theatrical Excellence Award for CGI/video in 2020. She is a member of the United Scenic Artists Local 829 and has an MFA in theater design at UCLA and a BFA in design and metalcraft at SNU in Seoul, Korea. Lastly, we have Tal Yarden. Tal's credits on Broadway include Network, Waverly Gallery, Sunday in the Park with George, Indecent, and The Crucible. London credits include Hamlet, My Brilliant Friend, Lazarus, Antigone, Obsession, Exterminating Angel, and Kings of War. Off-Broadway and regionally, he has designed video for Between the World and Me, Superhero, Passing Strange, A Walk on the Moon, The Night Watcher, King Lear, Liberty City, and The Misanthrope. His opera design works includes Mahagone, Macbeth, Salome, Mazeppa, La Clemenza di Tito, and The Ring Cycle. Award nomination includes Tony's, Lucille Lortel, Moliere, Drama Desk, and What's on Stage. He lives in Brooklyn with his son. Thank you all again so much for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and stop screen sharing that. And let me admit a few more folks. There we go. Excellent. So again, I'm going to put actually all of our amazing guests' website in the chat if you would like to visit their websites. And then they have also generously offered their contact information at the end if you would like to contact them or reach out. That is also in the chat. So to begin with, for a very, very sort of broad, open question, and I'm going to direct this question to you, Davonte. What is projection design?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because I think that, especially when I was starting out, it was a great opportunity to just hear what other people had to say about it. And what I found is that many people have their own perspectives on it. And in that way, it's kind of a personal question. It's like, how do you view what you do? And I don't know if it's completely definable, but from my personal perspective, I feel like in a lot of ways, it's an image-based medium that allows for the immediacy of theater and the density of film. It is something that has been experimented since people started putting shadows on the walls in caves. And it's ephemeral. And so in that way, it allows for both the audiences and the characters on stage to commune with the seen and unseen. And I feel like that's my personal look on all this, but I'm hugely curious about how everyone else has a perspective on that.
Yeah, any other fellow panelists have a response or an addition to that? Yeah, go for it, Wendell.
Well, just because Davonte was my student, it's an ephemeral pictorial edition. It's ephemeral, it's always in the air, it doesn't exist anymore. There is no projection that has any weight. It's all dancing digital dust. It's pictorial, that it's image-based, and it's an edition. Nothing in the world needs projection.
Can you say more about that? Nothing in the world needs projection.
Well, I mean, coming as I do from the theater, and since I'm the oldest person here, the projection is something that has been added to the scenic design or for the design of a thing. So in the sense that I work in live theater that has actors, dancers, singers, or whatever. I think about projection. I mean, I think about everything that you add to the performance. For me, is always a question of why. So I always like to use the idea of the addition because that makes you question why you're doing it. It's not always why do you do it? You do it to enhance the story, you do it to uplift the music. There's many reasons, of course, to add projection, but I like to always start by the thought of why do you want to do it, which has gotten me in plenty of trouble with many a director. But I think that that's it's basically the reason, for you as a set designer, why this color, why not that, why this shade of blue and why not purple, all of these things. But I want to put that in my definition because I think that it's important.
Yee, how about you? Any additional thoughts on like how you define what projection, or if you have a different way of speaking about that title, right? Like projection design, in addition to that thought on what projection design is.
To me, the projection design is additional layer on the overall scenery. That's how I understand that. It can be the imagery on the set. It can be another version of more complex, like the lighting fixture, or it can be also the big screen. So I think that's kind of the beauty of the projection is it's kind of hard to determine or describe like what exactly it is, but I think it's definitely new discipline, but also I think it's connected like every single other design disciplines. Like it can be part of the set, it can be also like more like the supporting lighting or set or costume or like the whole the stagecraft. That's how I've been always thinking about projection.
When you say that it could be, for instance, as a part of costume design, can you give an example of that or speak more to that?
For example, one of my previous show, the director wanted to transform the angel into another character. So the angel's costume was the solid white costume, but when she appears above the wall, we focused as a projection design. I focused projector on her. So when she's on her the spike, I projected the butterfly texture on her white dress. So it became totally different character when she was on top of the wall. So we use that. That's why so it's not like projection is a part of the costume design, but it can be kind of, they can exist together. I think that's kind of interesting part.
Yeah, absolutely. Tal, you have something you want to add?
Yeah, no, I really liked what Davonte said and wanted to jump off of that often, especially with younger students, high school students. I talk about, rather than thinking of projection design as a very new, innovative medium all about electronics and technology, that it's really our oldest theatrical form of storytelling. And that if we think back to people around a campfire or in a cave, that a way for them to kind of create a cinema, visualize their storytelling was with shadow and light. And so I really think of it as kind of like an intrinsic element to storytelling for many millennia.
Yeah, I think that's, Hana, were you about to say something? I thought I saw a hand, analog hand versus a digital hand.
No, not really, but because I think like previous panels already shared like really great insights. I also, Paul, were you finished though?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I did it like my hand was an accident. It was not like intentional movements. But I also agree that it's even though it seems like a new media, it really not. It's not really, because like at the end of the day, it is a visual medium that's working with light, which is all kind of elemental and timeless elements. Just like theater is a timeless ancient art form. And I think to me, when I approach projection design, I tend to think it as like almost like another layer. That's, I think what excites me for projection is like that chemistry between like ephemeral light layer with a very tangible physical element. And in a weird way, I almost feel like AR is like somewhat similar to projection as well, in that concept that like you almost put something into your reality that can be subtracted or added on very quickly, and thus having almost like giving us a different like layer on the meaning as well. So not only scenic, but also like it's it could be your like inside of your mind, or like the fact that like it's like somewhat also cinematic medium. I think projection design, I feel like it's like a little bit of everything, and that's probably why it's so interesting that it can go anywhere.
Yeah, you
that's
really.
my accidental hand comment.
No, it was a great accidental hand comment. It was wonderful. Yeah, I think, something that is so compelling is the ability to have such versatility and choice about what we see as a projection designer, that it feels like, at least as a set designer, I feel like I'm so limited by materials, or not limited. Sometimes it's really beautiful, but the sort of flexibility within how you can, the choices you can make and how you use the art form, I think are so compelling in that ephemera. I think it would be amazing to hear a little bit more about sort of how a process works. And Tal, I'm going to put this to you. And obviously, there's no singular design process that is completely plug and play for every single project. But I think it would be amazing if you could touch on, what are some of the key steps or ways that you approach projects, or what is the process of projection design, excuse me.
Sure. I think that probably like all of us who are primarily theatrical designers, my first, the first idea that comes to, or the first connection I have to a project is an invitation to participate in a project. So it's a collaborative art form. I'm always being introduced to a new project, either by a director or a scenic designer, or perhaps by a producer. So I'm being invited to read a text, think about a subject matter, and think about how I want to collaborate on telling a story. And so my way into projection design is always starting with trying to really understand that story, inhabit that story, understand the dramaturgy, have discussions about where the story is located, what period it's located in, what era. Is it going to be a modernization of a classic? What is the approach going to be? So often I'm having a lot of discussions, always with the director, but often with other designers as well, about what wants to be said. What do we want to say with this particular production? If we're going to do a Hamlet for the umpteenth million time, why do that? And what do we want to say with it? What do we want to express with it? And almost always that's led by a director. They have a particular thought or vision or idea why they want to do that project, not necessarily a visual vision, but they have an emotional impulse to connect with an audience using that story. So I'm really trying to understand what that's about and where I can exist within that framework and how I can contribute. How can I do something I care about, engage with that story in a meaningful way, and connect with an audience? So that's really the start of it, before I ever think about what kind of projectors I want to use, or if I want to use cameras or things of that nature. I'm doing a lot of kind of visual dramaturgy based on what the period's going to be, what the scenic designer is thinking about for the environment. I'm doing a lot of research, a lot of exploration around the topic, and then eventually kind of coming up with a palette of imagery, of aesthetic, of often I'm reading things that are not necessarily about visuals. I'm reading philosophy, or I'm listening to music and just thinking generally, what is this world that we're going to inhabit together collaboratively? So that's where my mind goes. And it's a very slow evolution to, okay, this is going to be the world, often first described to me by a set designer, and then thinking about whether we're going to project onto the scenery, or whether projection's going to be on a supplementary screen. There'll be often a big decision is on a lot of projects I work on is whether we're going to use live cameras or not. versus everything being pre-made content that's going to then get projected onto the scenery. So, well, anyway, that's kind of the starting point for me.
Yeah, I'm interested, other panelists, if you feel like your processes have a similar sort of beginning state, or do you have a different example of a way that you enter a project or begin a project? Similar.
Yeah, it's pretty much you gotta do the dive. You gotta get in the swim of whatever. And as Tal says, it's a collaborative enterprise. So you're trying to intuit what the director is feeling. Why did he make that choice? I mean, and since I also do concert work and ballet, it's really, I don't have, then you don't really have anybody to talk to. It's like you and the music, and you have to really try to open yourself up to these impressions that you might turn into something that's visual. But as Tal said, it's all about the research, and a lot of it is not visual. A lot of it is, reading the history of the Firebird and trying to go back not only to whatever the dance history is, but what's the Russian fable history of it, so that you can pick out those few things, even though none of it may end up on the screen or be something that you can point to say, oh, that was that. But it's all like, it's kind of part of the music in your head as you make choices. I know that that's not very specific, but I think it is a little bit that way, that you just stuff your head with all of these facts and feelings, and they help you. All of that helps you to make the visual choices. It's not a path. It's like you have to sort of live it while you're living it. And I would guess that the other designers have that too, that when you're in a project, sometimes it can be almost debilitating, if you're in a subject that's painful or difficult. I mean, I've been in that place where it's just like, it's a lot, because I'm trying to live it, and then choose and then make decisions based on that.
Just to piggyback on that, I think it also is just very fun in terms of the fact that I've gotten a chance to do other disciplines, and the thing about doing projection design that makes it so much fun is this process. I feel really sad when people want to skip over it, or you find yourself in a project a bit later. When you're in that initial stage, you get a chance to play around with abstraction in a way that it's, because it's an ephemeral element, you get a chance to explore these things, I think, a lot more than scenic, in a way where you have to have something concrete when you make a scenic design. And therefore, whatever you think about has to have some sort of real thing that you see. But this thing, you could just stay in the air for a while before you come down, and that's actually kind of fun, at least for me. So.
And Davonte, when you're saying initial stages, that for you, that's sort of like all of the preliminary conversations, all of the research, all of the sort of immersion that Tal and Wendall, I feel like you're speaking to, of just sort of steeping yourself in the project, and then all of the surrounding history, visuals, everything. Is that what you mean by initial?
Yeah, and the other designers probably don't have concrete ideas yet. So then you're right there with them in terms of like, what could this thing be? And now when you're having conversations with people, everyone's kind of forming those ideas together. And so it feels more collaborative in that way, but you get a chance to stay a little bit more abstract longer than everyone else. I guess that's what I'm speaking.
Yeah. How do you, so you're steeping yourself in all of this amazing research, you're having conversations. At some point, I'm assuming you're leaning towards clear impulses, but you're not in the theater yet, or you're not at the venue. What are some ways that you can communicate those impulses to the director, right? As a set designer, I build models. I think as a lighting designer, it's really complicated because there's no way to sort of envision it prior to being in the space to some degree. So as a projection designer, how do you communicate those visuals as a part of this process? I'm going to throw this to Hana.
I think usually in terms of like theatrical context, usually we would have, even though it's not final set design idea or some sort of set renderings or drafting, some sort of like structure that we will be working in terms of environment. And then visualizing, I usually tend to storyboard it out. Either whether that's overlaid on top of set model photos, or just a shot by shot like contents walkthrough. But also, as Davonte mentioned, we can play around in the air for a while. I feel like storyboard tends to, sometimes it sticks, but I feel like it tends to change a lot in tech as well, which is also like part of the fun.
And how much, and again, this can be from anyone, how much do you feel like you have to create prior to being in the space? And how much do you have to make once you're in the space?
I personally tend to think of it as like, I'm just gonna like prepare tools that I can just go into Sandbox and then play. So in terms of like pre-tech creation wise, everybody has like very different approach. Personally, I tend to not be so locked down or married to something, because I feel like, again, like that being in the space feels different sometimes. Sometimes like it can be very similar to like what we all imagined. But I enjoy that spontaneous city as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to create things that can be easily manipulated in real time in tech, and that kind of like influences my workflow or how I work as well.
Mm-hmm. And again, sort of focusing on process, Yee, maybe you can speak to this. When do decisions get made about where the image or color or texture, whatever those visual choices that you're making, how the audience is seeing them? So when do choices get made about if it's on a television screen or if it's projected onto the back wall? When does that usually enter the process?
It depends on, it's kind of different in every project. Sometimes I joined after set design is locked. So for example, if they come up with like, we will have this gigantic TV screen in the back. So sometimes I get locked down. But usually if I get to start talking about design with the rest of the team from the beginning, I talk a lot with the set designers, and then I sometimes suggest, like, what do you think if we have, for example, like the floor projection, so we can, or like I sometimes suggest, like, even though they plan to have a projection just for this area, I usually recommend, like, what if we just have the full coverage just in case, like Hana and Davonte said, like, because a lot of things happen once we are in the space. So I try to have as much possibility as possible. So it's more like more canvas to play. Mm-hmm. So even though sometimes I joined to just put a couple of the slide images and TV, sometimes it ended up becoming bigger projection show. But sometimes there is also opposite, like it was meant to be a heavy projection show, and then we realized it can be also, it's going to be more powerful if it's minimalized. So sometimes I reduce the amount of projection. So usually we have some basic idea when we're talking the pre-production process, but it's also kind of organic once we load in, and then during tech, a lot of time during tech, from my experience, a lot of time they decide to add more projections because I think it's faster and then more convenient. I think because like we have tool and for example, like I usually bring my library with me. I like some of the videos that I, just in case I think we might need, but for example, like they want to try the clouds, then it can be the last minute ads. So it's kind of flexible, but usually from my experience, I think I tend to like expand a little bit more than the basic ideas from like the director and set designer. But I mean, that's kind of my personal experience. I don't know other designers how would feel.
Yeah. And do you feel like as a projection designer, how, again, in your process, how important is it to be really familiar with the sort of technological choices, right? Like, do you have favorite types of projectors, or do you tend to prefer one piece of technology over the other?
It also depends on the project. But I do have my favorite gears that I usually suggest. So once we talk about that, I usually suggest that this might be the best ideal gears. And then then it moved to the budget discussion. But yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of options and different gears. So it really depends on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting because my next question again is sort of centered around technology, and Tal, your statement about how actually projection has been with us for so long, right? The idea of like shadows on a cave wall, something I personally hadn't thought about. And so I'm actually going to direct this to Wendall, but over the course of your career, how do you feel like technology has changed, and how has that affected your art form and your making as a designer?
Well, in the beginning, of course, we had to carve it with the stone tools, and it was very difficult to get them thin enough that we could pass light through. Yeah, I began in the dawn of time. The dawn of time is in the 1750s with the magic lantern. But I began working with slides, and and I've been through every kind of projection up until digital media, which everything is now digital media. Nobody is going to go back, sadly, and make film or make slides or make panis. So what has changed in all of this time is that in the days of making slides, it was so complex to do that. And certainly when we were doing panis and pani scrollers, and you were making images that were multiple exposures in cameras where things had to line up, that all of those decisions had to be made. And then to change your mind was, I'll be back to you tomorrow with a new version of this. It was the early idea of rendering. It was, you had to actually go back to your studio, remake something, reshoot something, bring it back in. So it had a huge impact. It meant you had to be incredibly prepared. You had to be knowing exactly what it was that you wanted to do, and to have a certain amount of stuff that you could alter it with, but it was basically the slides that you had were unalterable unless you had time to physically remake them. That all changed. I mean, and when we were doing pani slides, that was, you know, nothing could happen except 48 hours later. It was just that complex pani slides were 6 inches by 6 inches square. It's gorgeous. No image has ever been projected as beautifully as in a pani, but all gone, because now it's cheap and cheerful. You can have, digital projectors. They're really cheap. I mean, a Pani is the size of a washing machine, hanging over a balcony rail, and, next to it, the dryer, making lots of noise. So, I mean, I'm not sad for losing them as tools, but so what changed, each of these technologies changed. Slides changed things. The ability to computer control slides changed things. When I started out, we used punch tape to control slides. You had 8 holes. Every one of those was a signal to a projector. It's like boggles the mind. When things became digital, the thing that I see is that there's quite a bit less preparation in many cases, because the preparation is not as important, because you can change your mind. And I didn't have that possibility. And I have to say, my preparation is still very much, I have my entire show when I walk into tech. Now, knowing that the entire show that I have is not the show that's going to happen, that I have the show that I think I'm doing. I also have the show the director thinks I'm doing. And I have some hybrid of other things that is what the show is going to eventually be, because now in the digital age, it's easy enough to swap that stuff around. And, the various media servers have made that easier. I mean, I work almost exclusively with Watch Out, mostly because there's no rendering time. I can see immediately what I'm trying to see. Even if I have a thing, I'm going to look at it, it's a pineapple. I don't want a pineapple. I want to see what that color looks like in this place. That was not possible to me. Just to change a slide, somebody had to, climb a ladder, get in the thing, do the thing. I'm glad that those days are over, except for the part where it was a handcraft and it employed a lot of people. And but it's over, like so many other sort of handcrafts, they're just not available. So I don't really regret it, but there were beauties associated with film that you'll never know, because you never saw it, you don't miss it. But I miss it.
You mentioned the program Watch Out. What is Watch Out?
Watch Out is a product by Datatone. It's what's called a media server. And probably somebody who cares more about technology can describe it better than I can. But essentially what it does is you load in your media into Watch Out, and it is a way to output it. And what you can do in Watch Out is you can change the scale, the size of whatever it is you're putting in there, the intensity, brighter and darker, and opacity. So you can layer things upon each other. And I used it as a tool, and I oddly still think in layers like I did when I was making slides. So for me, it's really the only useful tool. I do not work in After Effects. I do not work in Photoshop. I mean, things are built for me in fragments that in Watch Out, I'm able to bring together and control that way, like an animator, which is where I began. So I think that I think differently, not being born in the digital age in that sense. I have a very analog way of thinking, and I sort of use the digital tools to work with me in the way that I would if I was, which is probably stupid, but it's what I got.
And how much, I'm gonna actually direct this to Davonte. How much of the actual making of the content do you do, or is that actually often is that somebody else who's making it for you and you're sort of responding to those choices?
I think it depends on project to project in terms of that. I take a huge inspiration from the Wu-Tang Clan. I believe the RZA said one time in terms of what he thought of what he tried to describe what the Wu-Tang Clan was, and he was like, well, when we all come together, we form Voltron. And so I think in that way, in the sense that, you want to bring the best people that you know of, and whoever you know of who might be best for that project would be the ones you kind of call on. And it's a very collaborative field in that way, because I have to say, I have a lot of fun on my shows. Despite what might be the subject matter, the people who I am, oftentimes work with, is like a good friend of mine who I know is a really good programmer, or a good friend of mine who I know is a really good animator. If I know this is a really big show, I need to have like 3 or 4 of my friends who's going to be like all different abilities and skill sets that I may still have some of those skill sets, but I know that I need to kind of delegate those things and trust them to do those things for me. And so if it's a small project, and especially if it's something I'm doing for a friend and the show's like $200 in a small theater, then maybe I'll do almost all of it myself. But if it's a show that is a much larger piece, I might say, well, this is a really heavy animated show, so I'm actually going to hire someone who's going to help me animate some of these things. Or this is a very technical show, I definitely need a programmer. I probably need to have someone else to be an associate to kind of communicate between myself and the other technical departments, including sound and light. So it is project to project. I think it is kind of a scalable thing. Ideally, I always want to have a nice crew, but I don't think budgets always let me do that. But I always call on the people who I trust and think that their work is great, and try to make my team as fun and capable as possible.
And are the sort of roles that you just spoke about, are those professions in their own right? Like, you could enter the field and become a professional associate. You could be a professional programmer, a professional animator.
I mean, I think in the abstract form, I'm thinking the ideal world, it would definitely be something that people would want to look into. I mean, the reality is, I think if you are a professional animator, you could definitely work outside the field of theater and make a lot of money. So, being an animator would definitely be some sort of, passion project where, oh, I'll work in animation and theater, and that might be fun. I'll work with a friend of mine, but you might also be an animator outside of theater. And I would say the same thing for other stuff. For the most part, the people I do call on are also projection designers. Many times, if you do find yourself working with someone who's a professional programmer, for example, I mean, that is kind of their profession, and you're working at a level that, can support whatever project it is, can support that kind of talent. But I do think that in some regards that those are worlds in which you can pursue. I think that it behooves whoever wants to do that to look outside of theater, because there are a lot of opportunities for people who have our skill sets. And if they're super passionate about animation, they can do motion graphics for a television show, they can do theater if they want, etc.
Mm-hmm. And like, obviously working with your team requires so much collaboration to know how to communicate, to know how to respond and share, and to figure out how to ultimately arrive at the desired outcome. I'd love to sort of like dig in a little bit more into perhaps some of these other key collaborations with the rest of the design team. Tal, could you speak about sort of, as a projection designer, how you approach collaborating with like a lighting designer, for instance?
Well, it's changed a lot over the years. Collaborating with lighting designers used to be the bane of my existence when I first started out.
Why is that?
Well, it's a lot about technology. I mean, it has to do with the power and possibility of projection equipment. So when I first started out, if I could get a 6,000 lumen projector to work with to cover a big wall, that was already a big step. Now I wouldn't dream of doing the same kind of project without a 30,000 lumen projector, 5 times the power. So my relationship and attitude with lighting designers has shifted, because I feel like I'm a little bit more in an equal playing field with them. That said, I mean, as I was saying earlier, we've all talked about, it's a very collaborative field. So there's always been a dialogue between all the different disciplines, and that especially comes into play during technical rehearsals. So we're all talking back and forth, not just with lighting designers, but also with sound designers or set designers. I'm thinking about, if my image needs to land in a certain way onto a piece of scenery, but something's inhibiting that, that's a discussion with a set designer. But with a lighting designer in particular, projections light. So anything that I'm doing, especially if it's big scenic projections, is very much has to be in dialogue with them. And then nowadays, often projections are cued and driven through lighting. So often things get married together so that the lighting programmer will be taking all the necessary cues and adding that into their programming to trigger, the projection servers, the media servers. But it's evolved now to a point where I think it was Yee was talking about earlier that the possibility of thinking of a canvas and putting projection everywhere just to have the flexibility. And so often when I'm designing projects, I'll try to have projectors covering every square inch of the set of the theater, if the budget can support that, knowing that it'll give me a lot of flexibility, but also that it'll give lighting a lot of flexibility, and that there's a real dialogue, that there's things I could achieve with projection in terms of visual effects, lighting effects that are going to appear as light to an audience, but are really coming out of the projectors. And so sometimes I work a lot with a programming server and program called Disguise, or it used to be called D3. And it works with multiple layers. So like Wendall was talking about, I like to have many layers of different content that I can kind of collage and put together in the room to see how it fits and have a lot of flexibility. Sometimes those elements will just be textures or color, so that, and they'll have soft edges or sharp edges, and I have a lot of control with that, so that I can throw light into the room, or always in conversation with a lighting designer in a way that they may not be able to. And sometimes I'll even hand off layers of my programming to them and say, well, here's some tools, you can work with that, and I'll do the other stuff. So part of that's just playing nice. I give them possibilities to do things they hadn't imagined, and they leave me alone to do the things I want to do. So
I think also, and we talked a little bit already about the relationship between the space, the set design, and projection design, but I'm really interested to hear from you, Hana, about this, because you are also a set designer, and so what is your relationship to collaborating with scenic designers when you're examining the space or creating the space?
Yeah, I think this happens to everyone though. Like if you are brought on early on, I feel like you tend to also have like a good influence on like how the set ends up being, because it's like a constant kind of like talking point, and so it's like depends on each other almost in a way. Um, so yeah, I tend to um, another thing that I learned, I don't do both very much, set and video. I think I do video and projection work more than like designing set, but sometimes I do both. And whenever I do that, like in the beginning, before I actually like did it a few times, I thought it would be easier, but not necessarily. It's just like having two different people in your head and constantly fighting each other. Um, but I feel like basically like same dynamic, like obviously like it's a collaboration, but like I think same dynamic happens that like with the set designers, like that it has to accommodate like mechanicality a bit, like where to put projectors, and then how do we run it, and then also like I tend to like to explore different surfaces and different materials, and even like reflections, using reflection, because I also try to, what also fascinates me about projection specifically, is the physics of light is also fascinating to me. So that kind of things I think get into consideration. And in terms of collaboration with set designer, I believe all of us usually have kind of final say on like, oh yeah, that'll work for me, or can
And-
we treat this as a surface, or
And do you find that you are more compelled, or do you find that you're sort of more excited by surfaces that maybe aren't inherently built for projection? Like, are you excited by, I don't know, projecting on something non-traditional, like, I don't know, brick, or I don't know, versus like something that's like a neutral, I always think of like neutral gray as like the friendliest thing. Maybe that has changed, but to sort of respond to maybe a space that's very architecturally specific and complex, is one more captivating than the other, or does it not really matter?
I'm personally up for game, but it always like needs like testings.
Mhm.
So I love kind of like doing it on like a not expected surfaces, but then always has to kind of be tested. And I've done this actually becomes like trickier when you do like site specific projections, when you have to work with like existing a city, or that type of things. And sometimes I've done like guerrilla, like bring out like a small generator and then plug in my baby projector to make sure that like the city light wouldn't dwarf the thing that I'm projecting onto this bridge, or something like that.
So you were speaking about sort of doing site specific work, which makes me think about installation, and also how for many of you, you're multiple disciplinary artists. You do projection design, sculpture, set design. Davonte, you come from specifically a film background initially, right? In terms of your undergrad training. I am curious, how has that informed your projection design work? And again, I'm interested to hear from others too. How do these other art forms feed into your projection work?
Well, I think the biggest thing is I was just more or less interested in film, just the idea of seeing it, being participatory in it, acting in it. The thing that kind of got me past all that, though, was the idea of what exactly or how we are perceiving these things. I mean, there's one thing to watch a movie in a movie theater, but I think one of the things that really got me first interested in just like the idea of going beyond that was like there was a festival at school that we had our movies playing, but we just played it on a wall, and I was like, wow, this is so much cooler. And it wasn't really that cool, but it was just like it was a different way of looking at something. And I think that as things progressed and I started to experiment more, and I moved to Chicago, I got involved with a theater company that did a lot of site specific and installation work. That sort of dialogue is what actually was something I was more interested in. That beyond the kind of cinematic tropes that are accumulated in the dialogue of cinema, I think that the other part of it was just like, how do we watch it? And I think that also kind of goes into what Hannah was talking about in terms of like what we are projecting on, what kind of textures we're playing with. There's something about the thing that has the image is just as important. It's almost as if that thing is talking to us, that the space has things to say, and that somehow the show is illuminating them. And that comes out more that from like a wall that has bricks on it than it does from a gray surface. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there's something interesting about making things that seem inanimate alive. And whatever that is the thing that I got attracted to me more than just movies.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a wonderful thought, that like bringing a space alive, because again, in speaking from a scenic designer's perspective, obviously there's scenery that can move, but at the end of the day, it's a physical object. It's this like concrete object. And so how to sort of see beyond what's immediately on the surface, or to expand another layer of that, I think is really compelling. Tal, you are also list yourself as a director specifically. How does that inform your work as a production designer?
Mostly getting in the way of the directors that I collaborate with, because I have too many ideas. I mean, I went to film school, or that's what I studied in school, and I've anything in front of the camera, or me being behind the camera, is kind of my first love. So I really approach a lot of things from the point of view of a cinematographer. And often I'm making original content for shows, which means that I'm doing a lot of pre-planning and a lot of storyboarding long in advance of getting into technical rehearsals, and often collaborating with the same set designer or costume designer to go on location and shoot a lot of material, sometimes with the same actors, but often with additional actors being brought in for those images. So, and my experience has generally been that I end up being the director. They're often the stage director is not there. They're in rehearsals, and I'm off shooting original material. And so, and then in addition to that, I'm, do some fashion films and music videos and things of that nature. So where I direct for camera, not on stage. And so, yeah, anyway, that's been my experience.
Obviously this is a unique time that we're in. How has the art form changed it, or how has your work shifted? And Yee, I'm going to direct this to you. During COVID, how has your role and work changed in this moment? Sorry, I was going to direct that to you, Yee. How has projection design shifted in COVID? Sorry.
Oh my God. Sorry, I just got a call. I declined it.
No worry. Okay.
I mean, to me, obviously, a lot of my show got either postponed or canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of free time. So I actually always wanted to do my personal work, because I never got a chance to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a commission from the Movement Theater to create like the short 3 minutes video. And then it was like the very just short video. And then I collaborated with the sound designer and the composer friend. And it actually was a very fun project. And then I realized a lot of theater are trying to find the digital content for their digital season. So someone saw that video, and then I was invited to another virtual festival that I made another video. Most of like the first couple of months, I made a lot of video about the immigrant artist, because that's how I got commissioned. And then actually I realized that making the digital content, it's actually a lot of fun. And then also you don't really need to travel.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started to work a couple of other theater companies. And then also the music, the institutions, I created the digital content for the concert, and then they filmed that to stream it as part of their digital season. And then also I created the Christmas Carol. So we had an actor in front of the camera, and then with the green screen. So I also created the background, and it was actually kind of fun because I actually got to play a lot. Usually when I do in-person theater, it is also very fun, but I think I got to be more artistic in a way that the digital platform was formed. So I did a lot of pre-recorded projects. Mostly, I actually didn't really get to do a lot of virtual, like streaming Zoom productions. But yeah, so I think it would be also probably cool to hear from others about their experience too.
Yeah, has anybody else been making work? Go ahead, Wendell. Yeah,
I made a ballet outside.
amazing.
Yeah, it was like crazy. Well, in July, I said to Lourdes, who runs the Miami Ballet, I said, by December, we're going to need the Nutcracker. Like, people are going to be shaking if they don't have some ballet. And I figured, well, you got the weather. Maybe we could figure something out. And it was insane. It was completely insane. But we did 14 performances outdoors with an LED wall where I created lighting and scenery, or I created lit scenery. I had Jim Ingalls to light it, like the dancers, but I had to light the scenery and video because, well, what else could I do? Yes, we did 14 performances and nobody got sick. So it was kind of a miracle. But other than that, I have not made, I'm like looking at screens all day. So I have to say, I have not really even checked out much in the way of Zoom theater because it hurts my heart. And I know that there's probably really good stuff out there, but it was when I arrived and there were real dancers and a stage manager and a headset, I nearly broke down. It was so exciting to do that.
That sounds really, really wonderful. I can relate to my emotional missing of that space. Yeah, I mean, has anybody dipped their toes into Zoom theater? I get really mad at calling it Zoom theater. I like to just call it a digital performance, or maybe there's a better terminology. Davonte?
Yeah, I did a couple of them. I mean, I think for myself, what I find is a great workshop into a performance model that people haven't done before. Maybe isn't necessarily something that people look forward to, but it's always good to just do something different. I mean, just like any sort of actor workshop. And so they've come in different forms. I've done them in different capacities, whether it's like switching Zoom and adding things live, whether it's mixing them together in kind of a more video production version. I mean, it's an interesting exercise. I think it's great that people have gotten a chance to do it, but that's what I've looked at it as, just a year of workshops for theaters, where I think in a lot of ways, one of my kind of gripes about things is just that in terms of regional theater, there just hasn't been that much investment in the technology. And I think in a lot of ways that hampers what people want to do for that. And the conversations oftentimes come out of a misunderstanding of what is necessary. And I think that this year in some ways have at least opened people's eyes in terms of like, what is the lag time? What is delay in all this? And why do you need this to make all this live video happen? Like, I don't understand. Well, now you do. So at least at the end of this, maybe there might be some education in terms of this stuff. But
yeah, I think that's such a great point because again, as a set designer, I know that often my notes are, I have to tell the shop and they go back to the shop and they do it. And there's sort of this like clear outcome, whereas like the sense of a change or a note can be, I think feel really mysterious in a way that's unhelpful for folks who are not a part of who are not projection designers or aren't aware of those processes. There's so many amazing questions in the chat that I want to shift us over into a live Q&A. Elizabeth, if you want to turn your camera on and join us. And if everyone wants to, again, just put their questions in the chat, Elizabeth will help.
Yes, but be careful because we're barely going to get through these.
All right.
So make them brief. I'm going to have to rely on you, Kristen, to direct them to different people, or we'll never get through them if everybody
Right.
answers. So the first question is from Jane, and it's, how did these designers decide to become projection designers versus lighting designers?
Anybody feel strongly about your journey? Great, go for it, Wendell.
I'm here totally by accident, and by any day now, I might actually figure out what it is I want to be when I grow up. So
Perfect.
I was a filmmaker who got roped in, and I started off on Broadway. I know that's not everybody's journey, and so here I am. And really, maybe I will figure it out
Awesome.
and do something else. But I love imagery. I am a picture junkie. And all I want to do is look at pictures, movies, and I want to make stories. And I use pictures to make stories. So it's the perfect job for me until I find the next one.
Perhaps you want to address the next question, and then Kristen, you can decide if someone else should. Alex had to go, but he had a really good question. Do you designers tend to create your own imagery or work with photographers, and what legal parameters and issues do you have?
I'm going to throw this to Yee because I saw that you unmuted for the other question, but I'm going to throw this back to you.
Oh. It depends on the project. I personally like creating my own content, but when I definitely need a professional help, for example, that the green screen, the Christmas Carol I just mentioned, we had to have 4K footage, and then with the really good quality of the video. So I work with the videographer and then also editor together to create the raw video before we put the background. So that's that happens when you really need a good footage. I also, for example, I also did a very heavy animation project, and it was 40 minutes of hand-drawn animation, and definitely I couldn't do that. So I worked with I was the lead designer, but I also had one illustrator and 2 animators. So they were joined as a team. So that's how we ended up making like 40 minutes full hand-drawn animation. Sometimes I also purchase the stock footages, and then that also, and then if there's a lot of the historical archival footages, I tend to work with the lawyers to go over the copyrights and then talk about the usages. So it really depends, but whenever we need a professional help, we tend to work with a lot of people. And then also, I usually work with the lawyers whenever there's like heavily like copyright involved the project to clarify the usage.
Great. Does anyone else want to comment on that? On how you work with your imagery?
Library of Congress and National Archive has tons of material, and it's owned by the people of the United States. Go get it.
And a lot of museums have free stuff too for still images. Joshua asks a good question. He wanted a little more ideas or advice on how you prepare your toolbox to provide freedom in the tech process. I think some people address that, like what do you have right there when you're in those tech rehearsals to be able to change things quickly? Somebody said they brought, I think it was Yee Eun Nam said you bring your library, or somebody did. So anyway, who would like to address that?
Yeah, I do usually when I go into tech, I usually know what kind of material I would need. So for example, if we have a thunderstorms, I have one thunderstorm video, but I have a slowed down version. It depends on the media server, but slowed down version, or like just the lightning, or like kind of multiple different version, like different scale. that I have with me. So I tried my first choice, and if it doesn't work, I sometimes just compose it multiple different videos, or like just to use the second option. And then usually I also have the textures. Some of them I created, some of them I purchased, but like the concrete wall or the sand textures or the ink textures, I usually have it just handy just in case I need it. So I kind of have like I created my rough library, usually just for that project. I pull the stuff and then I put everything in the library, and then I bring it with me in the tech.
Awesome. Kristen, maybe you want to send this one to somebody. Luke had a question. Are there ethical guidelines that that you have about using imagery when it comes from kind of sensitive issues like other people's stories, you know, involving violence or this or that, you know, other ethical concerns that you get involved with?
Great. I'm going to throw that to you, Tal.
It's a really great question, and something I've given a lot of thought to, and it's varied a great deal across different projects. So for example, I worked in China on a new opera that was for the anniversary of the rape of Nanjing. And to do that, I was offered, you know, tons and tons of research material, a lot of photographic evidence of atrocities. And I was very, you know, anxious about it, in addition to kind of the horror of having to spend a lot of time with this imagery, which has happened again and again on different projects. Which does take a toll on designers. I mean, you know, everyone has had their own version of this. You know, in working with the producers, and I was just sort of pulling back, and I was like, what, you know, can I play with this? Can I colorize it? Can I slow it down? What can I do? What's permissible? And in talking with the producers, and they said, look, we've all grown up on this imagery. It's so familiar to all of us that we're putting it in your hands because you're an artist and you can do something with it. So I began to take liberties, slowing it down, pulling out certain sections, calling attention to details, not necessarily the obvious details, not necessarily the most horrific, but trying to find something in all this material that I could do artistically. And it was really challenging, but a really useful discussion. And one more quick example is I worked on an opera in London, a new opera that revolved around stories relating to 9/11. And in anticipation of that, I went to the 9/11 Museum, and through a contact found a curator there that would sit and talk to me. And I had that very similar discussion with them about, like, I can't just throw up these images, which we've all seen on the television repeatedly. What can I do? How can I approach this material? And so she showed me some work other artists were doing around this, and kind of gave me an entree. And she, I think one of the most kind of powerful speeches, or not speeches, but discussions I ever had, was with this curator who said, like, that's your job. You know, you as an artist are taking this material and creating narrative around it, helping shape its importance and its value. If we just think of it purely as an archival image that's going to get filed away, that's not going to have a life beyond the moment in which it happened, it has very little value to the culture. So by making art out of it, it has the opportunity to live across generations. And it was just like a wonderful, instructive discussion.
Great answer. David has a good question, more of a technical nature. there's a range obviously based on the show's size and budget, but as a general rule, how many people might there be on a projection designer's team doing content creation, programming, etc.? A couple of people alluded to it, but it'd be great to have a clearer idea. Some people want that.
Great. Hana, will you speak about that?
In terms of the team, I think it does range. I'm not sure if there could be like a general. Well, I guess like bare bone structure could be other than like you yourself as a one-man band, which I also do sometimes depending on the budget. But I feel like if the budget is reasonable, video tech lead person, and then a designer, yourself, and kind of general content assistant. In case, I think another thing about tech is like you do have to have your focus on the stage. And then I find that even though I do it all the time, it is pretty challenging to trying to make up something if you need to change something really quick, and then at the same time pay attention to the stage. So I would say bare bone structure like that I'm used to is might be like 3 people team, and then from then on I can see that it could go like many more, like, you know, 6, 7, depending on your budget. I haven't had like a 6 people team, 7 people team, but I know if the show is big enough, then you can like work as a studio. I think it really depends on the budget of the show and the scope of the show.
Anyone else on that issue? How many on your team?
I think you need at least 2, because you need somebody's looking at the stage, that's me, and somebody else who's doing the programming, because I think that looking down at a keyboard and looking up at the stage cannot be done at the same time. And the idea of having 7 people on a team is so exciting to me. I hope I get that just once.
That's awesome. Nina had a good question here, and Kristen will tell us who's going to answer it. Building on the idea of bringing to life inanimate objects with your projection and surfaces having things to say, do you conceive of your projection work as characters within the productions?
I'm going to throw this to Davonte.
Oh, it's actually for him. Perfect. It was written for him. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the end, it's like these are things that has some sort of perspective and commentary on the things that's happening on stage. It is appearing and giving some sort of reaction, and that's really what a character is. I mean, whether they talk or not talk, you have many times in plays where there's a character that doesn't say anything or just moves, and you are creating something that moves. It breathes, it has life over the span of the show. And so in that sense, it is a character. Whether it's written specifically by the playwright is a different question, but characters don't necessarily need to have lines. They just need to have a perspective that moves with the show. So I think so. Of course, they could be stronger characters or less strong characters depending on the show, but they all have a perspective and opinion.
We still have a couple of more minutes, right, Kristen? Okay, good. We have a couple of more questions. Thank you for that last one, Davonte. The first thing is a comment by one of our liaison mentors. This is a fascinating panel. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences, everybody. And you're also from such varied backgrounds and can apply your trade to so many aspects of entertainment industry. And here's the question. Hypothetically, how do you feel the future of projection design is going to influence the live theater, opera, dance design? How do you feel the future of projection design is going to influence those things?
Wendall, I'm going to throw this to you.
All right, good. I'm glad. Well, if you know the history of projection design, that the real beginning of projection design as what we know as modern projection design comes out of Belgium after the end of the First World War. because there was no wood to build scenery. And so it seemed like a really good idea to be using, even the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen took his shows on the road with magic lanterns because it was too expensive to be rolling up all those drops and taking them by horse cart. So in a moment when I believe, when everybody is going to be struggling after the pandemic, and I'm already talking to several ballet companies who have lost huge amounts of revenue, they're going to be looking for ways to create a live experience that feels fully fleshed out. And I think that projection is going to be able to aid them in this cause. So I'm thinking the future looks good.
That's very positive and wonderful. I share a history with you too, Wendell. So anyway, I remember the Pawnee projectors. The last question is sort of a comment and a question. It's again from one of our liaison mentors, David. It's sort of a comment versus a question, but per Davonte's comment, that is a very common problem in regional theater. Well, wait a minute, I'm not making sense. I'll get to the question. The problem that he feels a lot of people face in regional theater and smaller theaters, that the theater administration often seems to think that they're just going to go online and grab free content and don't budget for the cost and time to create content. Do you have anything that can help us convince them of how important it is to be able to buy what we need, buy imagery, etc.?
I'm going to throw this to Yee.
It happens quite a bit to me as well. Whenever I request a media budget to purchase either or make the content. I think it's, it really depends. I usually, whenever it happens, I try to convince the producer that I need the money. And then sometimes I have to make the list of like the reason why I need money. For example, like couple of months ago, I got a project offer, and then they didn't have a media budget, even though it was a musical. So I had to create the whole document saying, I need this amount of money. This money will go this place, and then this money will create this kind of scene. So that's how I got the budget. But sometimes a lot of theater think they can just type into Google and then just download it and then throw in the back wall. But if they just decide to stick with that, it's just unfortunate. But when it happened to me, I think I always try to educate and then tell them like, this is not going to happen. And then you cannot just download from the Google and then use it. So that's how I usually do.
If for no other reason, the horrible resolution things are in. I found that out the hard way. Thank you all.
And water, oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry, go ahead.
And it's illegal.
Yes, that
I know,
too,
and
of course.
yeah, and sometimes they have a watermarks on the official trailer that I had to email them to just don't take it down.
It's always a good idea to ask them if the set designer is building the scenery.
Well, if it's a union scenic
nobody
designer, they
ever-
should be using a local one shop here in New
But,
York.
but no set designer builds any scenery. There's never a question. There's always a set budget. There's always a budget for that. Kristen, have you been building any scenery lately in your backyard?
No,
It's so
there
frustrating.
you go.
Thank you all for your great answers. In a second, I'm going to throw it back to Kristen, but first I want to say Jane had a question. What union are projection designers in? Sure enough, there's a new category in United Scenic Artists 829. We have a category for projection designers, which I hope you're all in. And I thank you, everybody. And I'm putting into, this is for everybody, I'm putting into the chat the Equity Through Design mentorship website, where you'll be able to look up this video of today's occurrence. Back to you, Kristen. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth, so much for moderating the Q&A, and those were amazing questions. Thanks to all of our panelists. You're just so wonderful. And again, it was so great to hear your expertise. Jane, close us out.
Well, I guess the way I'm going to close it out is my own story about projection design, a quick story. I was designing the Inspector General a long time ago at the Williamstown Theater Festival, and I had all this flying sheets and scenery and all this stuff. And I'm watching it going, something is missing. So I got out an old projector that was stored up at Williams somewhere, and I took some India ink and I just basically painted onto a slide and I scratched it. And I just like threw it in the thing and it projected on the scenery. And I was like, oh my God, I've gone into the fourth dimension. It was just like, it just carried the whole thing away. And it just became a huge part of my vision of life as a designer. So I thank you all. It was really a wonderful, wonderful meeting today. So everyone, please look for this. We have our own YouTube, so you'll see this whole thing recorded with our other 4 panels we've done so far. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon. And thank you all projection designers. You're wonderful. Take care.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.